My name is Reverend Salome As-Salaam, and I'm a member of the Mental Health Network. I will be discussing what it means to be in covenant with those who are living with mental illness and how our covenant with one another reflects God's covenant with humankind. It is important because as a community of faith, we are called to comfort and care for one another. The W.I.S.E ministry is an extension of the ministry of care. I hope you enjoy the workshop, and thank you for watching. My name is Salome As-Salaam, and I am on the Mental Health Network board. Also, I'm retired UCC clergy.
I'm Sarah Lund, serving on the UCC Mental Health Board as Vice Chair, and also serving as Vice President at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we're grateful that you've gathered here for our workshop. This is a workshop to think about being wise. How many of you here are wise? That's where we want to start, is being wise, being educated and informed about mental health. And so we're going to ask you to be thinking about, how are you wise about mental health? How are you welcoming? How are you inclusive? How are you supportive and engaged around the topic of mental health and mental wellness? And then from there, we're going to look at how can your faith community, your congregation, be wise, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for mental health. We have created, in response to the United Church of Christ General Synod Pastor Resolution, encouraging all settings of the church to have mental health ministries. And so we felt called as a mental health network to really focus on congregations and helping congregations create a process where they can be welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged. And so since the resolution passed, we've created a 10-step process for your congregation to be wise. And so this workshop will walk through the 10 steps to be a wise congregation. We also want to invite you to ask questions and share with us about your concerns and your experiences. This is a tool that we are creating together. The United Church of Christ is really on the cutting edge for mental health ministries. To our knowledge, there's no other denomination or church, Catholic or Protestant, who has embraced, as the UCC has, a calling to engage in mental health ministries at the local level. So we're creating a new resource that can be shared with our ecumenical brothers and sisters. And so I wanted to encourage you to consider helping us create this resource, make it stronger, and share with us about your experiences as you go through the process. So the first step in becoming a wise congregation for mental health is to consult with your pastor. Your pastor, of course, has the authority in the congregation, but there are other people who have authority in the congregation, right? Mm-hmm. And so as we think about who is the leader of your congregation or your faith community, it might be your pastor. We hope your pastor is a leader. And it might be other people, some unofficial leaders. Usually it's the woman who has the keys to every locked room. So you want to be in touch with people who have influence in your congregation and take them out for coffee or for lunch and share with that person why this is important for you. And it might be sharing with them a personal story and what you have learned about what it means to be welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged, and why it matters for God's kingdom. So think about who it is in your context. Maybe you are the pastor, and so it's having a conversation with yourself about, in all of your obligations and all of your priorities, how high of a priority is a mental health ministry? Is God calling you to this ministry? The second step is to form a wise team. In the scriptures, we're encouraged that wherever, how many people are gathered? 2 or 3. And so a lot of us have congregations with maybe 20 people in worship. Some of us have larger churches, 100. Some have very large churches. But really, your WISE team can be 2 or 3 people, maybe 5 or 6, but you don't want it to be too large. And as you think about creating your WISE team, we encourage you to consider including on that team people with lived experiences of mental health challenges. It's important to have people at the table. Nothing about us without us is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about disabilities and inclusion. Nothing about us without us. So that small group of your WISE team, what I believe is at the heart of creating your team is prayer. A lot of times we rush through our prayers. In church when we worship, a lot of our churches pray the Lord's Prayer and we kind of mumble through it. But this will be a different kind of prayer experience because I believe God is calling us to be a witness to the world. And it takes a lot of determination and a lot of faith to be witnesses to the inclusion around mental health, because there will be challenges, there will be some pushback. And so to ground your ministry in prayer, praying with each other, for one another, asking for God's guidance. And a lot of our churches go through the open and affirming process to be welcoming and inclusive of people of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, questioning. There can be questions that rise, and it can be a very challenging time in the church. There can be questions about agendas and politics. And so the way to persevere is through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And you know that it's God who is calling you to do this work. And so to really be prayerful in your team. The other thing you want to do with your team is to educate yourselves. You'll want to find out who are the mental health care providers in your community and go on some field trips. Set up appointments with the counselors in your community. Find out what resources are available to the public schools. Find out if there's a local NAMI chapter, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That's the largest grassroots organization for mental health education, support, and advocacy. For free, they provide support groups, peer-to-peer, people with lived experiences, and family-to-family for family support. And oftentimes, in my experience, NAMI is so excited to have a church partner. What resource do churches have in abundance? Space, a building. We have property, and it's not always utilized 24/7. And NAMI and mental health care providers are often looking for space. So that is a wonderful way for your team, once you're formed, to really be educated about what are the resources in your community. The third step is to connect with us at the UCC Mental Health Network and look at all of the resources that we provide you. On our website, MHN, mentalhealthnetwork-ucc.org, we have pages of resources for your congregation. Resources for Mental Health Sunday, which is the third Sunday of May, sample sermons, sample liturgies, sample children's messages, Bible studies. We also have examples of WISE covenants. And we have the 10 steps to become a WISE church. So contact us. We have our brochures here. We have our email address. And the reason why we want you to contact us is because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we have volunteers on our board, 15 board members, who will walk with you on this journey. To consult with you through phone calls, through emails. Some of us are available to come and speak at your church and preach at your church. So we really want to partner with you as you go through the process. Then we go to the fourth step, which is to develop an approach that ultimately leads to your congregation's vote to become a WISE congregation for mental health. Now, developing an approach that would lead to a vote might look like a year-long process for some churches. And why would it take a year? Because education is so critical. There are still a lot of myths, a lot of stereotypes, and a lot of ways to educate our congregations about what it means to welcome people with mental illness. When we were discussing the resolution at General Synod, we met in committee. And in that committee meeting, preparing to vote, there were several questions raised about what this would mean for our churches to become wise. There were clergy who stood up and said, wait a minute, are you sure we want our churches to welcome people with mental illness? Does that mean we will be welcoming sex offenders into our church? Is that what we really want to do? And so you want to create space for people to ask those really hard questions and to struggle with the answers to those. And so we encourage you to develop a process that is multiple months long, and that you bring in guest speakers, bring in your mental health care providers. If you have people in your church who feel that they can give their testimony, that's so powerful to have someone that's known within the church give a mission moment. So those are different ways that you can prepare the church to create a covenant. And we'll look at what it means to create a wise covenant in our next step.
Step number 5 is draft your wise covenant. Draft your wise covenant. And the question I have for you is, what is a covenant? What is a covenant?
Contract or promise.
Contract, promise, okay. Anyone else?
With God in the middle.
With God in the middle, all right. Any other thoughts about that? What is a covenant? No? Okay. Well, you're both right. It is a contract, a promise. God is in it. The word covenant comes from the Latin word, which means agreement. And oftentimes we use the word contract and covenant interchangeably. But when you have a contract, it means that you are pledging goods or services. But when you have a covenant, it's between two persons and God. Now, the difference is, when you have the covenant, it is a step above a contract. Because a covenant is not just a promise. You take an oath with God as your witness. That's the difference. Now, what's the first covenant in the Bible? What's the first covenant? I know you know it. What's the first covenant in the Bible? Thank you. That's Abraham is the first covenant. And oftentimes, if you've ever been to court, you've taken a vow, an oath that says, I swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, to help me God. So when we have a covenant, we're making this promise, this commitment to someone else with God as our witness. And that's pretty important. So it's important that we know what we're going into and the kind of weight it carries when we have God as our witness. And the next step is step number 6. And that is involving your congregation's leadership and engaging the WISE covenant. If we're going to do this, we have to get everyone on board. That includes leadership and the congregation. It's a process that will take time, lots of coffee, lots of lunches, talking to people, getting people's comments, concerns, suggestions, buy-ins, because you want to make sure that when you go to the pastor, whoever you have to go to bring this to a vote, that you have a consensus, that everyone has bought into this process for it to be a good process and for it to be healthy and functional within the congregation. That's number 6. That's number 6.
And as part of 6, when you want to engage your leadership, it could be bringing the draft of your WISE covenant to a church council meeting. If you have a youth group, how amazing would it be to engage the youth in the draft of the WISE covenant and to include them in the support of this to the congregation?
And one other thing I think is important as well in step 6, involving your church's leadership and engaging in the WISE covenant, is making the stories personal. if you go to other members or if you're going to the pastor, tell them why you're committed to this process. Maybe it's something you're struggling with, or someone in your family, or someone in the community that you know on a personal basis. If you make it personal, in most cases, people will be able to engage and to buy into the process. But tell them why this is so important to you and why you want to do it. The next one is step 7, which is the vote. The vote. And what I was sharing earlier about the voting process, when my church was going through the process of being open and affirming, I didn't take it for a vote unless I knew it was going to pass. You have to make sure you have the buy-in first. So when you do have the vote, you know that it will be a good process and they will affirm it. And you gave a wonderful story before about a church that...
Yes, so open and affirming in the UCC is when a church has a commitment to be welcoming for people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. And so I served a church in Florida, and we were very much committed to that through a prayerful, spirit-led process. And there can be some pushback and challenges depending on where you're located. And I had a colleague who led her church through that in Arizona. And what worked best in their context, instead of having a vote, it went back to the idea of a covenant. And so they took a piece of white butcher paper and covered the communion table. And over a series of several weeks, people were invited to sign their name to this covenant as a way to come together as a congregation to affirm the covenant. And over the Sunday after Sunday, the names began to cover the entire piece of paper. And that was a beautiful way for people to take their time and to really think and pray through the process.
And it's important that before you have the vote, that everyone has a copy of the covenant to read and that you get a consensus. And if there are any questions or concerns, those things can be addressed prior to the vote. The next step in the process is step 8, and that is certify and celebrate being wise. Certify and celebrate being wise. Once you've had the vote, we know it's going to be a yes, it's been approved, then you celebrate that. How do you do it? You can do it through announcing it during the worship service or having a special worship service to support and to acknowledge the new covenant you have as wise. You can put it on Facebook. You can put it in the newspaper. There are all kinds of social networks now that you can use this information on, and most of it's free. You can put it in your local paper in the religious section. Let the community know who you are now and what you've done, because unless you don't, they won't know that you're a wise congregation. So you have to make sure that you spread the word. We are wise, and we celebrate that, and we invite you to become a part of our congregation.
Other ways to celebrate, always with food,
Yes.
to have a potluck, to invite people to that celebration, mental health care providers, to invite your conference minister to come. A lot of conferences will have annual meetings, so ask your conference minister, can we celebrate this milestone at the annual meeting? We'll be celebrating the WISE congregations at General Synod this summer. So it truly is something to praise God and to celebrate.
So within thinking about publicizing that, and it looks like that's the next step.
Yeah.
So like our equivalent in the ELCA of open and affirming is being a reconciling in Christ congregation, and it's a very similar process. You draft a welcome statement, but they're usually very short, like a little paragraph that can be put on. Many congregations that are RIC put it on their homepage. Are there examples of these WISE covenants that are like condensed versions that can be used for that purpose?
That is a great point. I think that when you are looking at the public face of it, it can be very helpful to have a couple of sentences, and that's good feedback. So we'll work on making that available on our website. It might be a line about we are a WISE congregation, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for mental health. That's one example of a short way to share that.
And step 9 is publicize, and we talked about that, how you would publicize it. You could also put it on the bulletin on Sunday morning, so when people come in, they can also see it. I had a big banner on outside of my church for opening and affirming. You could also have a big banner saying we're a wise congregation and what that means. There are all kinds of ways you can publicize, and we can help you with it. We have a resource list on our webpage as well that will help you figure out how you can best publicize this great celebration of becoming a wise congregation.
In some local papers, if you submit a column, they might publish a column for you. You can see if they run a story about your church, and that's another way to share in the community.
They might come and interview the pastor.
You might be on TV.
And step 10 is turn to the future. Turn to the future. What do we do now and where we go from here?
But wait, once you become a wise congregation, then you're done.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
No, you're just starting. You're just starting. The real ministry begins.
Yes. Any thoughts or comments on becoming wise?
Yes, in the back. Yeah.
I'm Mark Lacey, and I'm an open and affirming consultant with the Minnesota Conference of Evangelicals. And there's so much similarity between WISE and the process. And yes, there's nothing that drives me more crazy than walking into a congregation and seeing an open and affirming certificate on the wall. And
Nothing.
we check that off, we're done.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's about, and when you use language like covenant, covenants are living, breathing documents, and they need to be used, they need to be fed, they need to be revisited, they need to be implemented.
Yes. Thank you for that. Our first workshop, it was mentioned, you could have a mental health Sunday every year, so an annual, and that could be your renewal of your covenant. And so there can be an intentional time leading up to that. Let's review the covenant. As we learn more about the brain and mental health, expanding our awareness, there might be changes we want to make to update the covenant. So to have that annual celebration and renewal service as part of your plan for the future is very helpful.
And we don't expect you to go through this process by yourself. We're here to help you. We're here to help you. We have a board, we have consultants. So if you need some information, some suggestions or advice, give us a call. We have the resources on the webpage, but also you can contact us as well if you have direct questions or specific questions. We're here to be of service to you to make this work. It is a process. You grow into it, but this is the start.
Can you say the webpage just one more time?
Yes, it's printed on our brochure.
I can just
It's
give you the brochure.
mhn-ucc.org. Mental Health Network, mhn-ucc.org.
Any other thoughts or comments about? Yes.
Have you had other institutions that are not congregations go through this process, like UCC seminaries or other? Because I know like the RIC process is open to synods and seminaries, and can be adapted for that as well.
This process can be adapted for other settings of the church, youth camps, conferences, seminaries, and we have not yet had anyone pursue that. But maybe someone in this room, we have a few conference ministers here today, can really lead the way for that.
How's the UCC insurance? Seems to me a particularly important connection with living out a wise covenant or the direction of the synod. I'm not covered by the UCC insurance. And I'm not sure what the healthcare offerings are for in mental health with the UCC insurance, but I think
Even individually? Is that what you're saying, or for a church?
The insurance board offers healthcare coverage for
churches.
The pension board
pension
offers.
board, I'm sorry.
Health,
Okay.
And the insurance board offers property and
Right.
liability insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And some
I'm
of the,
sure,
both of them though, because there's liability then for mental health
right.
consultation.
So both of them respect what General Synod does. So I couldn't testify to this, but I can come really close to it. Both of them are going to support activities around around becoming a wise congregation and being inclusive in that way.
Well, is the insurance that's offered, the healthcare coverage that's offered, broadly inclusive of mental health?
It is.
It is. For individuals, yes, it is, definitely.
Individual policy, yeah.
You have to apply within 90 days of being called, or pre-existing conditions will not be covered.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
That's true.
really important. There is an open enrollment for the first 90 days of any call. Do not be slow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
a
with
gr-
our
I'm
partnership
sorry.
with the Disciples,
Yeah.
it's a challenge because the Disciples stopped offering healthcare.
Right.
And the UCC insurance would not pick up those disciples that are serving UCC churches because we missed the 90-day
Okay.
window.
I did, oh, okay.
What this conversation is lifting up is the importance of advocacy in our mental health ministry as a denomination, whether it's around clergy, mental health care, advocacy in your local community. As you know, there's a real crisis around resources, a waiting list. If you have a youth in a psychiatric emergency, there might be a wait for that youth to get into a bed. And so there are a lot of ways where you can be an advocate in your local community and on the national level around mental health care, access to resources and treatment.
One of the things that I did as a pastor, I put together a resource book for my care team so that they would have access to the resources available. And everyone had a copy of it, so they didn't know where they could go. Oftentimes, if you don't have insurance, you don't know what to do. So it's good to have a pack of resources that people can go to directly to get the kind of help that they need, you know. And that could be part of being a wise congregation as well, having those resources available, the information available.
Well, I think we wanted to take a few minutes now to invite you to turn to your neighbor and take some time in conversation with each other about how this WISE process, how would you get started in your context? How would you get started on becoming a WISE congregation? Just turn to your neighbor and we'll take a few minutes for that conversation.